I'd like to acknowledge that the land we stand upon today is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the neutral peoples. Can I get a mover and a seconder for confirmation of the agenda, please? Moved by Councilor Deal, second by Councilor Morrison. That the agenda of the special meeting of council dated December 20th, 2023 be adopted as circulated. All those in favor? And motion carries. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest from any member of council at this time? Seeing none, thank you. Reports and recommendations. I turn it over to the CAO Financial Strategy for 2024.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, if we talk about the Lions Park, I wasn't able to get through all of the
Okay,
papers, and I will be a conflict. Thank you.
okay, thank you. Go ahead, Brett.
Can I say a prayer first?
Sorry.
Can I say a prayer first?
I can
Got the podium there.
No, I don't have a sermon today, but I do need Jessica to bring up my presentation there. Thank you. So, should I just have the clicker?
That works, yeah.
So, you've all had a chance to kind of review our 2024 financial strategies. You know, the first time you guys kind of saw something like this was last year. Holistically, it's not really changing much significantly. We've tweaked it obviously, in terms of a little bit more detail. So last year we were able to kind of get sort of big ticket items kind of included. This year, based upon some of the consultations that, you know, staff have done here with different groups, we've been able to add a little bit more of sort of that smaller detailed capital projects that we need to go forward.
Yeah.
And so it's a bit revised. And so we'll kind of quickly go through it. So I'm not going to go through in detail my report. I'm just going to go through from a presentation standpoint, some key highlights. So one of the things I think that I will give you probably a more comprehensive report on the budget survey. You know, we want to do a little bit more analysis into what some of the meetings might be or some of the information. There was some really good information that came from it. We had about 54 individuals that responded to the budget survey. Now, first thing some people might say is that's not very many people, but the reality is within what you would get from a budget consultation process, 54 is a lot more than you get at a public meeting that aren't staff. So I think we got some good input. One of the things that I don't mention here, but I just mentioned, it was well distributed within the wards. So we're getting good equal distribution of those 54 respondents from all wards throughout the municipality. Based upon the survey, there's a few takeaways I kind of wanted to highlight. More of it's obviously in the report, but a couple I'll highlight here. Significant majority of respondents wanted to either maintain or increase the level of services in for most part, all cost centers, but recreation parks, economic development, fire, public works, and interesting law enforcement were fairly strongly supported. Not saying it's not important, but there was a significant amount of people that wanted to see us actually increase services in law enforcement. There was a slight majority of respondents that supported an increase in taxes, user fees, or both. So about 56% of respondents. And a large majority of respondents said that it was important or somewhat important to set aside funding to replace capital infrastructure. So for me, in terms of this financial strategy, to me, those are sort of takeaways. Okay. Also, in that budget financial strategy, I felt it was important. I think I might have spoke about this a little bit last year in terms of our taxation levels, but I think this year I want to do a little bit more of a robust analysis in terms of figuring out where we sit and where we sit from a service level perspective. So this table really is just trying to show you where we sit from a taxation standpoint. So municipalities are ordered in rank of highest taxation to lowest. As you can see, we're sitting in fourth from the bottom, with respect to all the comparators, and we're third from the bottom within Huron County. Interestingly though, on the converse side of it, when you look at service levels, we are sitting in pretty much the top 3, or for that matter, 4 place in terms of service levels. To me, those are contradictory statements. One saying low taxation, high service level, and somewhat contradict each other. So it's important for us to make sure that we consider that. And I don't really have any sort of specific analysis to say where we should be, but my guess would say that we probably need to be in the middle of that. Yeah, in terms of what taxation should be, to be able to support the services that we have in the municipality. One of the things that council had asked for, the biggest discussions, particularly when we were talking about the ventures and debt borrowing, was that a better understanding of what our reserve amounts are for various reserves that we have. So I'll kind of quickly go through these. The former ward reserve, we've got 204,000 in it. The vibration fund reserves, 291,900. The PW equipment reserve has about 147,000. Most of that's just from the fact that we didn't spend the money on that used tandem we proposed to find last year or this year. Get that straight. As well as we had some of the equipment that we did replace. We were able to sell that at a surplus value, and so that money is being put back into the reserve. So that's where the primary key. It's based upon 2023 financial strategy, that pretty much would have been zero. Parkland reserve, that's the amount of money that when we see land developments happening and changes from developments to planning applications, there's a requirement to submit funds in lieu of parkland, and so that's that reserve. That's a restricted, dedicated reserve, restricted from the standpoint that we need to establish it, report about it. But we've also recently met, the province has come out and said that we need to use 60% of that each year, which pretty much depletes those funds pretty good if we start looking at 60%. In terms of roads and bridges, stormwater drains, that's the one reserve that I think that municipality had established. Most of that was being generated from, so I'll call it surplus, OCIF, gas tax, and aggregate resources dollars that you didn't use each year when you were doing road projects. Now, when we look at our road projects, we're pretty much spending the full OCIF portion of it. So we're kind of depleted, but as we go on and start looking at bridge projects and so on, as we go through the years, we'll ultimately start using that. Talk about the strategy a little bit in turn. I'll talk about that later. So if we just park that for me, Ali, if we just park coming back to bridge storm drainage reserve, so I don't forget to talk about it. The green energy fund, or what I think you guys originally started calling was your solar fund, your solar reserve. We've kind of reclassified that as of last year to call it our green energy fund. So all our green energy projects, so solar, EV chargers, whatever revenue, net revenue we generate from those will be put towards a fund, and we'll use that for green energy related projects. Okay. The building department maintains a reserve. That reserve is established under legislation to be able to have dollars set aside should there ever be a downturn in the economy and building numbers start to slump and you're not bringing in enough revenues to support maintaining your staff complement within your building department. We've been capped pretty much at 200,000 for several years because we've had fairly good building activity. Okay, so that's what that's used for, but it's fairly restricted in terms of being used by the building department for its operational or capital requirements. Russell's Medical Dental, Huron East Health Center. Those are two reserves we established essentially to deal with the capital needs of those assets. They're sort of self-generating, self-revenue. There's no taxation being used to support those services. The only difference between the two of them is the Huron East Health Center. Those reserve contributions are also used to pay off the debt for the original construction of that Huron East Health Center. Okay, so we borrowed money from the Seaport Trust, as well as we borrowed some money from our, I believe it was your sewage reserves. And so we need to continue to repay those debts and get those debts depleted. Streetlight reserves, money set aside basically over time to be able to ultimately replace all your streetlights. You went through the exercise of upgrading all of them to LED. But the fact that you did them all pretty much at the same time means they're probably all gonna get to that point where they need to be replaced at the same time. So putting aside a reserve on a regular basis will allow you to be prepared so that when that comes forward, it's not another financial hit. Waste management reserves, that's primarily set aside to, it's to cover your legislated closure and post-closure liabilities. So when you see your financial statements, there's a lot of conversations about that reserve being included to cover those liabilities. There's also a little bit of capital in there as well for future equipment purchases within the Huron landfill. We talked a little bit about that somewhere down the road. We're gonna probably have to replace our compactor before that landfill meets its life expectancy. Recreation reserves, there's about 194,000 sitting there. Those funds are dedicated to park and recreation capital expenditures. Probably mostly generated by some carryover from 2023 that we haven't been able to spend, primarily being the roof replacement on the seafloor. Getting into your utility reserves, we've got lots of different utility reserves for your full water systems and your 3 sewer systems. It's important, although there might seem like there's a lot of dollars in those, it's important to make sure that we look going forward in terms of what we need in terms of 10-year expenditures based upon our capital plan. So Brucefield Water, maybe no 10-year plans, but it's not a significant amount of dollars sitting in there at this point in time in terms of work projects for there. Brussels Water, a little bit more significant, but we need about 921,000 over the next 10 years. We will be adding dollars to it as well, so we won't deplete it per se, but it still leaves that fairly restricted in terms of being able to borrow from it. Seaforth Water, about 1.5 million, but we do have about $1.9 million worth of expenditures over the next 10 years. Again, it seems like we're in a deficit situation, but most likely do 10 years of reserve contributions, we're pretty close and be able to balance. And then, but Astra Water is the last one on the water side, 288,000 in there. But you need about 700,000 in the next 10 years for your capital project. This is basically primarily replacing your water mains and so on. Getting fairly low there. Hopefully our reserve contributions get it up enough to be able to catch up to that one at some point in time before we spend those dollars. Getting into sewer, Brussels sewage, fairly low. You went through some fairly significant capital upgrades in the last couple of years. You got the big sewage treatment plant upgrade, as well as you did Princess Street last year, I think. So fairly restricted in terms of what you might be able to do there. We're going to use about 41,000 in 2024. That's primarily to replace 2 roofs. And based upon the dollar amount, really not much to borrow from there. Seaforth sewage, I'll come back to it. Then after sewage, you got about 484,000 there. You're gonna need about 562 in the next 10 years. Going back to Seaforth sewage, this is probably your largest reserve that's available. About 1.7 million is required in the next 10 years. You might have 2 million, approximately 2 million, assuming no capacity expansions for the next 10 years. We need to consider the fact that if we end up doing any work in Englandville, in terms of sewer expansion, you're going to need those funds to be able to finance the capital works. So what you'll do is you'll borrow kind of from the reserves, and each of the property owners, when they do their debentures to pay back for that sewer, they'll be paying back that reserve. So you have to think about that. We need, beyond 10 years, you know, we could need up to $9 million for a sewer capacity expansion, sewage treatment plant expansion. And about 2 million is currently tied up in investments that we can't access right at this moment. Okay. Capital funding options. So some options here that you can use in terms of how you fund your capital expenditures. Taxation's obviously one of them. Reserves is a common use. Grants and municipalities in general do look at grant opportunities to fund some capital projects. Debt, no, well, I'll go back to grants, sorry. One of the challenges with grants these days is that they're fairly limited by the province in terms of what they're targeting. Right now, the province is really targeting sort of growth-related projects with respect to water and sewer. So if you were trying to apply for, replacement type projects that aren't related to growth, you probably would have a limited success based upon their goal in terms of trying to gain additional housing. They typically don't look at things like, well, for example, roof projects, or anything like that. They're generally looking for projects that have some net community benefit in terms of new benefit. With respect to debt, well, with the historical lack of levels of reserve contributions, this method of funding may be required to support expenditures to avoid unreasonable tax increases. So it's an option that we may have to consider going forward, or at least for 2024. One good thing is based upon the existing financial strategy as it's presented to you right now is I believe that 2024 will be the last year that we'll need to borrow money if we stick to the financial strategy. Okay, unless you're doing some new project that provides new benefit, whatever it might be, you want to build a new indoor swimming pool somewhere, let's say, then you might need to borrow money for that, but you'd also might be able to get some grant money for that as well. Not saying you are, but just in terms of fundraising, fundraising is an option for certain capital expenditures, but it typically has to have an ultimate benefit to the community or a specific user group. It's really difficult to fundraise for capital maintenance items for existing assets because there's no increased community benefit. Relying on fundraising for capital maintenance items can, in my opinion, can create what I will call sort of that fundraising fatigue, right? You keep going out to the community or to those benefactors asking them for money, you can fatigue them in terms of they get worn in terms of providing fundraising dollars for so many projects. So we want to be cautious and careful in terms of what you determine you want to do fundraising. A fundraising campaign, no matter what it is, how big it is, needs champions, as well as a well thought out and comprehensive fundraising campaign strategy. And the bottom line is just to make sure council understands this, staff do not have the resources to lead a fundraising campaign. I saw the effort that went into the Brussels Community Center in terms of the fundraising campaign. There was a lot of work by those volunteers, and they had actually a contracted fundraising campaign manager. So a lot of effort, right, to raise those types of dollars. And we all know Brussels is a pretty giving community, so you can kind of get a sense of that. All right, some of the options. So I listened when council was talking in terms of some of the challenges with debt. And so there were a couple proposals, I guess I'll call that council were asking to look at. First one is obviously what we're currently looking at as our financial strategy. Essentially, we were looking at borrowing $900,000 for a roof at the at the Seaport Community Center. Doing that, we would probably look at doing a 10-year debenture. Assuming a 5% interest rate, you'd be looking at interest costs of about $445,000 over the course of the debenture, assuming you went to the full time period of that debenture. As council had asked, I did reach out to our local trusts to see if there was any funds available through them that we could borrow at some competitive interest rate. And I did hear back from both of them. I hadn't heard back from Brussels at the time I wrote the report, but I have subsequently heard from them. And I had heard previously from the Seaforth Community Development Trust. So we have $700,000 we could borrow from the Seaforth Trust, and $200,000 would be available from the Brussels Trust. So if we wanted to be able to borrow, if our option was to continue borrowing for the Seaforth roof, there's two options. There's an option there in terms of borrowing from our local trust. One of the benefits, I guess we could say, in terms of the fact of borrowing from the local trust is that the interest gain goes back into those trusts, which again turn around and provide community benefit. Okay. When we look at what happens, and this is strictly the capital levy I'm looking at here, capital levy increases over the years, over the next 5 years, you're looking at about 3.6 for 2024, 3.7 25, 2.2 2026, 2.6 2027, and 2028 would be 3.3. And then if we assume an 8% off rate levy increase, so that don't start running out the bank, and Sean, if you're listening here, I don't know if you're there, don't start publishing that we have an 8% levy increase in operating, just to put some perspective. Okay, so you'd be looking at roughly about 11.6% levy increase. You look at that from where the county might be coming in, whether they're gonna be starkly different from that. School board typically comes in at 0. You probably end up looking at an overall rate increase, somewhere pretty close to that number. Okay. Second option was funding without using debt. So this is basically saying, we're gonna basically raise all the dollars required here through taxation. Obviously, fairly big impact in terms of the tax levy. 13% is probably what you would have in 2024. Added on to assuming an 8% operating levy, you're looking at a 21% municipal levy for 2024. The interesting piece about this is that because you're taking such a large amount of dollars all at once, you don't need to have capital levies for at least the next 4 or 5 years. Because you've taken so much money, and then once you've used it for the roof or whatever capital expenditure, then that money can be reallocated the next year to upping all your reserves and all your various cost centers. And then so you don't need to have increases over the next year. You can call this swallowing the big pill all at once kind of option if you want. It might upset residents to see such a big increase, but then the next 4 years you wouldn't have any capital levy increases at least, and you'd have more modest increases in your taxation. The last option, this is just for you, Councilor McGrath. This is the deferring capital expenditure option. The reason why I'm bringing this one forward, not just because Councilor McGrath was talking about sort of deferring as an option. When I was in the process of preparing the financial strategy, Mr. Mills, our Director of Public Works, had indicated to me that we're about 18 months delivery period for a tandem truck. So if I end up not paying for a tandem truck until 2025, I can defer some of that cost for 2024 to 25. When we look at some of the other projects that are in the capital plan, and we actually look at whether we can defer some of those, we can further reduce some of the expenditures in 2024. Ultimately getting to the point where we have enough funds to be able to fund without borrowing. And then you can see that in terms of the capital levy requirements, they're a little bit higher than what the current financial strategy is saying. So the debt option, but they're still relatively modest. I'm actually, as part of my position, I'm recommending that we look at the defer option. It really becomes our default option because I can't get me a truck in 2024 anyway. So probably not a bad option for us to consider under the circumstances. One condition sort of has to be of this is that council needs to give us approval to order that truck soon, today preferably, so that we can order that truck because it's not going to get delivered until late summer of 2025. That'll make that truck almost, well, I'll talk about it a little bit later. It makes that truck almost 5 years past its replacement schedule. Okay. So not a bad option. Slightly a little bit more than a debt option in terms of both increases for 2024 and each increase for subsequent years, but might be considered reasonable or acceptable for council's consideration. I'll go a little bit, I won't try to dwell too much on this, but I kind of want to just quickly go through both the capital plans for most of the cost centers, kind of what we're talking about spending dollars on. And then also kind of give you a bit of a sense as to what the financial strategy is saying we need to do for each of those cost centers. So roads, bridges, stormwater, and drains are kind of one difference between the last financial strategy. We had these all in separate sheets. When it came down to budgeting and putting numbers in the budget, it makes more sense to consolidate some of those cost centers. So we kind of consolidate road, bridges, storm, and drains to one. So for 2024, we have included the reconstruction of Sports Drive between Turnberry and King Street in Brussels. That includes some stormwater work, so that's all included in that total contract price. certainly an estimate based upon our estimates. And we're also looking at doing some improvements on a couple of our culverts and bridges. Both in this circumstance happen to be on Canada Company Road. One for 200,000, one for 240. We typically try to do our culvert and bridge improvements in advance of when we bring forward and do the actual road reconstruction improvements, so that we're not tearing up a nice new road. Makes sense, of course. And then our municipal drains kind of gives you a sense of what, these are just our assessments in terms of our costs. It's not the cost of doing the drain work, it's the cost of the portion that gets assessed in the municipality. So you can see we're getting quite a few that are coming up in 2024. Some of them have been kind of deferred from previous years, but collectively that's what the plan is for 2024. In terms of roads and bridges, ultimately, we need to have $2.4 million worth of taxation dollars to be able to fund. Sorry, not taxation dollars. We have about $2.4 million on average per year in terms of capital requirements. But we get almost $1.5 million of that either through OCIF, gas tax, or aggregate. So the difference essentially has to come from taxation. So the plan is to gradually ramp up our reserve contribution for roads and bridges over time to get to that 1.2 million. So when we think about the fact that we've got an existing reserve there, one of the reasons why is that financial impact for 2024 is zero. The fact that we have some reserve dollars sitting in that bridge, road, stormwater, municipal drain reserve allows us to be able to hold off ramping those contributions up, while we try to ramp up some of the contributions in the other reserves that we don't have reserves for, or reserve contribution. So that's kind of how the strategy kind of works. So we will start ramping up, but it just doesn't start in 2024. On sanitary, sanitary and water, as I've said before, their reserves are healthy. That's because we put a financial strategy in place. So when the province back, when I think it's probably one of the recommendations of the Clean Water Act and all the things that fell out of Walkerton, was that all municipalities had to create a financial strategy for their water systems. And then most municipalities did it as well for their wastewater systems as well. And the value of that is it helps you define what your water rates, sewer rates need to be to sustain operations. And it also helps you define what your reserve contributions need to be based upon those water rates, what they should be in order to be able to sustain your capital requirements for your water and sewer systems. So try and do the same philosophy in the rest of the taxation-based capital expenditures. So in terms of sanitary, no major real sanitary projects that we're tackling in 2024. I'm gonna guess the fact that the sanitary sewer up in Sports Drive is in fairly good shape, so we're not having to replace it. But we do have some roofs that need some replacement, so 3 different roofs. Your average capital requirement is gonna be about $190,000 per year. Your collective reserves, so this is all the sewage reserves combined, about 5 million. And your reserve contributions collectively are about 441,000. There's no financial impact on taxation in 2024. And it'll be kind of the same for the water system, which is next. Although you can see now Sports Drive, there's $411,000 there for replacing the water main along that section. And then we also have a roof at the National Water Pumping Station that we need to replace. Again, roughly about 315,000 annual capital requirements. Collective reserves sitting around 3.3. Sources of funding are the annual reserve contributions, roughly about $500,000. We no taxation financial impact because they're separate cost centers. Public works and equipment and property. So in the 2024 plan, as it currently stands right now, we had included the 2004 Sterling tandem replacement. And there's a couple pickup trucks, one's a 1 ton, one's a 1/2 ton, that will be replaced based upon our replacement schedule. We're talking about buying a new 6-foot rotary roadside mower. If you recall, the Director Mills' comment that it's getting more and more difficult to get someone to do roadside mowing for us, and the cost last time we did it. Our current contractor is not going to do it any further. and cost for another contractor to do it was almost double. So our intent is to bring that service in-house, do it in-house, you just need to buy the equipment. Operationally, you know, from a staff standpoint, we get staff in the summer, we'll just keep them on for the winter, when we actually used to hire part-time staff for the winter. So operationally, probably it's more cost effective for us to bring it in-house. So we've allocated to have some dollars there to buy that new roadside mower. The new shop office, so this is the gray shop. The office portion of that needs its roof replacement. I believe it's a flat roof. I believe Councillor, or Deputy Mayor.
Yes, you're right.
And then, so your average capital requirements for your public works, equipment and property, about 600,000, 590. Your current reserve amount, that's 147, which is basically what was carried over, or will be carried over from this year, as well as the additional dollars you got from the surplus disposal of assets you replaced this year. And then you got sources of your funding. Ultimately, by 2036, you'll have about $590,000 worth of taxation dollars required to support that. And then your 2024 financial impact is 490. And remember, I'm still talking about the original financial strategy with debt option. A little hard for you maybe to read this, so I'll try to go through it. In terms of parks and recreation, we got our roof replacement. We've got our there's a dehumidifier that needs to be replaced up at the arena, and we have roof beam refinishing that's been on sort of project list, but we want to tie in with the roof project. Up at the Brussels Community Center, we've got a brine pump that needs replacement, and we've got an existing electrical panel. This is not part of the renovation, so it's the old part of the building. That electrical panel needs to be upgraded and replaced. In terms of the Brussels pool, we got filter replacements required, and the pool deck is deteriorated. It's basically buckled and heaved in a few places, and the plumbing underneath of it needs to be replaced. So it's gonna tear up the entire deck, replace all the plumbing, put a new deck on. In Venastra, we're looking to renovate the change rooms. The intent is to do one change room this year and one change room next year. And then the one piece that worthy of some conversation discussing, if the council's not aware, and I think most of you might be aware, we actually have ownership, even though it's sitting on school board property, of the tennis courts up by the old school, which is now the administration buildings. It's not the old school, but it's the administration building. So we've actually taken on responsibility of that through some form of an agreement at some point in time. It needs a lot of work, quite frankly. It needs to have the surface refinished, as well as maybe some minor repairs to fencing. And then I think lighting's deteriorated there as well. What I would propose is probably, if we were gonna do that project, we wouldn't just put tennis courts in, we'd probably line them to be for pickleball. We'd also probably put some basketball courts in there as well, making a multi-use court facility. I don't believe there's any basketball court services anywhere in Seaport, if I remember, so maybe at the school over here. Walton, get ahead of myself. Brussels ball diamond regrading, so I think that's been on the radar for a while. I think it's been talked about since I've been here. They have some drainage issues with the ballpark, and so every year when we have a heavy rain, a lot of the materials on the ball diamond kind of get washed away, and they have to go through a whole exercise of regrading the surface. So that's a project that's been carried for a while. Walton Ball Park light replacement. So when Lisa and I and Dave were doing kind of our road trips, trying to meet with all the different community groups, it came to our attention that I guess recently, I'm not sure how recent it was, but fairly recently, one of the light standards at the ball diamond actually collapsed and fell. Fortunately, it happened in the after hours when no one was at the park. But my concern is that we've got other lights at that facility that are probably the same vintage and potentially of the same risk of collapsing. What I have done, I've asked, I think it's worthy of doing, is I know in conversations with some of the counselors is sort of answering their questions about this strategy. There's a concern that maybe we won't be able to raise dollars through the local group to be able to 50% share that cost. My concern is if there's a safety risk there, here East doesn't really have any choice other than to get them repaired or replaced. But at this point, I'm just gonna have an engineer go out and do an assessment of those structures to see whether they can survive for a couple more years. But all we can try to do right now to see if that's something that could be deferred. Otherwise, even if the local group isn't able to probably fundraise for it in 1 year, we may have to replace them and then have them refurbish or replace the 50% share over a period of time. Or not replace them all and take them down. That's another option, of course. Not sure it's an option council wants to consider, but it is an option. Winthrop Ballpark, there's an old picnic shelter there that quite frankly should just be demolished. It's a safety risk. We actually do have another pavilion that has the washrooms and that in it. So I think we just need to remove that so that we don't have any safety concerns there. Optimist Ballpark light replacements. The Optimist down here at the Optimist Park in Seaforth are looking to replace their lights to an LED system. So that's sort of on their radar. Again, 50% cost sharing according to our agreement with the Optimist, the Seaforth Optimist. The Quebec Park development, that was the project that Lisa had put a grant in through the Trillium program last year. We were unsuccessful, but we just moved it, carried it forward to next year. We can apply for a grant again this year, see if we're successful. It was presumed on a 85% funding. And then park mower replacement, we had included some dollars last year. Unfortunately, park mower equipment's become quite pricey. And so we didn't have enough dollars there. So we had to add some more dollars to that to basically get it to the point where we can acquire that asset. Brussels Library AC install. So there is no AC at the Brussels Library. So I think I asked John Hill to get me some pricing on what it would do to put sort of a heat pump exchange system up at the Brussels Library to provide some form of cooling. And last but not least is the Cranbrook Hall roof replacement. So again, Mr. Hill kind of goes out and does assessments. He was looking at the Cranbrook roof. There's some deterioration of the actual structure of the roof. And the roof itself really needs to be replaced in terms of the material itself. So we kind of estimated roughly about 50,000 for that. In terms of park and recreation, your average capital requirement over the course of, I think it's 15 or 20 years, I think what that one said, 370,000 is what your average is going to be. Your current reserve amount, 194,000. Sources of funding, you've got some money coming in through your municipal partners, on average about 8,000-9,000. You've got vibrancy funding at least until 2032 that you could put towards it. Your green energy reserve, that's primarily to replace your ice resurfacers. It seems like most municipalities are going to electric ice resurfacers now. So you could use some of your green energy fund to fund that since you're moving to a green energy option. And then taxation, roughly about 350. The impact in 2024 is about 300,000. Administration, a few things going on here in the office. We have some office renovations that we're currently undergoing with last year's money, but we're also got some additional renovations we need to do for office spaces in 2024. Gain some furniture requirements to replace the furniture and buy some new furniture for those new offices. John's informed me that the HVAC system here needs to be replaced. I believe it's the one over top of the back portion over here. Kind of ties into all the different systems within the building. And then we got the flat roof out the back here is due for replacement. So that includes the piece that goes around where the OPP rents, kind of back where the garage is and behind where the food bank is in my office, in Jessica's office. So that's a fairly significant cost as well, 80,000. We also need to obviously have our usual standard kind of computer replacement schedule. There is a request for the building department to get a large plan size scanner. So we'll use their reserve amounts to fund that. And then we have to buy a new asset management planning software package And I believe that's fairly significant as well. Some key points about this, our annual average requirement about 150,000. This also includes replacement of council's IT. It's got IT and administration all into it. Your current reserve amount's about 25,000. That's sort of what's left over from last year. Or this year, sorry. I'm already into next year. Sources of annual funding is obviously taxation, 150. Financial impact actually for 2024 is 200,000. And it's only because you've got some pretty significant capital requirements there in terms of your flat roof replacement and your HVAC replacement, that we had to increase that. The health center, these are fairly straightforward. We have about 50,000 on average required there. Our current reserve amount's about 89,000. Sources of funding on average is our net revenues coming in, about 50,000. Some of that obviously has to go towards our paying for our debt. Our 2024 financial impact is zero taxation. Similarly for Brussels, I won't go through all the numbers there. Again, no financial impact because it's not being supported by taxation dollars. Development. In terms of economic development, capital purchase identified for economic development, I call them capital purchase as opposed to the assets, they're a little bit different. We had proposed to do wayfinding signage. There's an opportunity that's coming up with the county and RTO to be able to do a 1/3 share arrangement with them. Considering $150,000. $150,000 would maybe be the first sort of kick at the can for this. And then we got our community improvement grant, which Chair Lynn spoke to last night at our council meeting. At least be able to provide some seed money for that project. Fairly modest amounts here in terms of contributions. Probably need about 38,000 on average. Pretty much we've depleted the reserves because we're just starting to build the reserves. We're going to about 40,000 in taxation, and our financial impact for 2024 is about 30,000 because we didn't use all the money last year for the Christmas lights in Brussels. So we're able to reduce the impact in 2024 slightly to help offset some of those impacts.
Can I ask a question while you're resting?
On coughing, sure.
The Wayfair sign, will that be for municipal type attractions, or will that be for helping businesses in the area be found?
It's primarily for the municipality, not for the business. Businesses certainly could be part of that program, but it's usually for them, it's a cost for them. Where we don't pay for it, but they might be able to buy Wayfair signage to be able to put up to say, you know, Bernie's shop down this road, but they would pay for that sign.
And that's all I was wondering was that if businesses wanted to get into it, could they still get the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3?
I don't think so. Well, maybe what Carolyn would say with that's potential.
Yeah, the RTO 4 does have funding for signage. If they're a tourism related business, they could tap into that. If not, they wouldn't be eligible.
Okay, so if it was like Maelstrom Winery.
Yeah.
And they have tours there and
Yeah.
things like that, so they could possibly also get granting to help them put up
Yeah.
signage.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just to note, Ontario's West Coast, which is the tourism department for Huron County, they already have a signage program. So I don't know what their like when they start putting up new wayfinding signs, I don't know whether their program would kind of mold into this one or how that would work, but.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thanks for the rest. In terms of fire services, in terms of 2024, there's the bunker gear that council agreed to a couple months or a month ago. The additional 95,000, that's to get all the expired bunker gear out of our system. New gear rack for the Brussels is part of the new addition. Some new lifting bags, if the council's not aware, lifting bags are those, you see them, I see them on those fire TV shows, where they pump up the bag to lift something off somebody if they're caught. We have them, the challenge is that we have is pretty old, and we're not sure whether there's expiry on them necessarily, or whether they're certified. Seaforth, I think, was the oldest, I believe. So we should look at trying to replace them. Accountability boards. That might sound like a strange term for you, but I think for fire service is a pretty important thing. In terms of accountability, is making sure you know where all your firefighters are, who's at what call, and where on a particular call they happen to be. They're about $5,000 a piece. They're very specific for fire service. In terms of what they look like, and it's a tagging system, I think something might be. The Brussels existing HVAC system, that's the older portion of the Brussels fire hall. Needs to be upgraded, so that's a 60. I included here based upon our delegation last night from our Brussels district chief, in terms of a parking lot expansion, 30,000 in there for that. The existing fire chief vehicle is getting sort of past its prime, but some council may not be aware. It was originally a William Police patrol vehicle that when Wingham disbanded their police force to move in with the OPP, it became a surplus vehicle that was ultimately transferred over to the fire service and part of our joint share. So it's a 2017 vehicle. We're starting to incur some significant maintenance repair costs for that vehicle. There's about 200,000 kilometers on it. The intent is to replace it and move towards an electric vehicle. I know some councilors have been interested in seeing these move towards electric vehicles in their fleet. This might be a great opportunity for them to do that. The ventilation fan that council supported for the Gray Fire Hall. We've talked about, SCBA compression fill stations. So we're kind of working our way around each of the stations to upgrade all the compressor and fill stations for the SCBA equipment, tanks. Decontamination equipment in Seaforth, so we've already got in last year's budget, putting decontamination equipment up at the Brussels as part of the renovation. And so now we're moving to Seaforth. And my last discussions with the Seaforth Firefighters Association, there's some concern about the building and wanting to be able to do some upgrades to it. So painting of the exterior and finish the completion of some of the interior renovations, particularly the radio room. So I've earmarked some funds for that. Thanks. In terms of the fire service itself, our average annual capital requirement, our portion is 360,000. There's no reserve amount. We completed that reserve, or really haven't had a reserve. Sources of funding, Morris Turnberry contributes fairly significantly to that as part of our shared operation in Brussels, and the rest of it comes through taxation. In this case, we're using about 30,000 of the green energy reserve to be able to fund that electric vehicle. Financial impact for 2024, about 285,000. Kind of a quick summary. So staff collectively, the folks that are sitting behind here, provided a comprehensive strategy to fund our existing capital assets. It's a significant amount of work for us to work through the various iterations. I know I gave you guys a whole whack of tables with a lot of numbers on them. There's certain key numbers, and I'm gonna ask Jessica, maybe we'll take a break if it would be all right, Mr. Mayor. And what I'd like to do is just quickly go through a couple examples of those tables, just to know, help council sort of understand what's important with those tables as opposed to every number. And I'm just gonna work with Jessica to pull it up. Little washroom break. If everybody wants it. Sure.
Sir. That gives me this breakdown. If you really. Yes, my fire. This is over there, resource information. This here.
All right, I'm ready to start up again. So I just want to go through a couple of these cost center tables, just to, I know it's a lot of numbers for everybody. I don't think you need to go and analyze each of the numbers. Really what it is an exercise that I use and staff use. We try to figure out what our capital requirements are, and that's all the numbers you see across going by years. My goal is to figure out what, based upon all that, what funding is required and where we're potentially getting funding. And then looking at what's the unfunded amount. So I'll use this one as an example. It's a fairly good one to kind of give you a bit of a flavor. When you look at that unfunded community park and recreation capital amount, that's the amount after all other municipalities, other programs, grants, whatever we might be proposing to come into play. That's how much we need to figure out from a taxation standpoint. And then the next line down below, that's the annual reserve contribution. As you can see, starts out at 260. We keep gradually ramping it up to about 360, which I think is what we recommend for the annual contribution to fund capital on the annual basis. A little bit of a spike in, I'm not sure what year it is. You can see that 500,000. I think it's around 2029-30. That's primarily to replace the cooling system on the arena, so a fairly big hit. So we have a little bit of a spike there to make sure that the bottom line balance is above zero and not negative. And then we go back down a little bit after that. If you could slide over to the far right for me, Jessica, just to show those numbers. So on each of these sheets, we try to calculate what the average is. In this case, 370,000 is what the average is. That's basically how much unfunded capital requirement is on an annual basis for the assets that currently exist. So we do that. We want to calculate that number because that tells me what I need to get my reserve contribution up to. You can slide back to the left again, please. And then we look at the different types of reserve contributions we have in there. There's obviously the taxation reserve contribution. We have our parkland reserve contributions. And then obviously our final balance. And I try to estimate what our typical parkland reserve contributions, that's the in lieu of parkland dollars that we receive on an annual basis. That's essentially how the process works. So key numbers for me out of that is what's my average requirement? How do I have to ramp that up to make sure that my cash flow remains positive over the years? So I try to slowly ramp these things up over time. And you can see in this case, this is the original scenario, we're borrowing $900,000. And then I'm showing the actual interest cost each year, interest and principal, pardon me, for that debenture over the years. So, if I can get you to flip to the other one, please, Jessica.
Which one is that?
We're moving to the roads capital. Table
Roads and
2, I
bridges.
think it is.
Roads and bridges.
Table 2. For table 2, the only thing that's a little bit different, same philosophy off to the left, the right, pardon me. We have what we'll call as our average, sorry, actually, in this case, it's actually sitting on the right, so it's right up above there, your 20-year total average cost requirement. Or different, also, it's for different assets, so actually, you have to go to the left from the guess. The right, sorry. Oh, they're the right. My other left, yeah, that's it.
Sorry.
So because I have to look at what my total is for all those different cost centers, I have to look and see what the actual requirement, you can see, I can't read that number, about 2.4 million. That's how I'm deriving what our annual requirement in terms of funding is required for those assets. That's including roads, bridges, our storm sewer systems, and then as well our municipal drains. Okay, so it gives you a bit of a flavor where we need to be. Now, some of that comes out of OCIF, your gas tax, assuming that those continue into the future. Hope, fingers crossed, and our aggregate resource development. So in the end, we need to put $1.2 million into that on an annual basis to fund our existing paved road network. Right? This is the assumption that we're not paving any new roads, so any gravel roads are not becoming paved. So we're not increasing our level of service. We're just maintaining the existing assets that we have in the municipality. Okay? We might be doing some bridges and culverts on gravel roads, but we're not paving new roads with that dollar amount. I want to make sure that was clear. You can slide back to the left this time. Again, looking at this table, you can see that I'm gradually increasing the reserve contributions over a course of time to get us ramped up to that 1.2 million. Again, that's to make sure that we're not having any huge taxation impact. So we gradually increase it. It falls in line with your asset management plan, which says you should have a 4.2% capital levy anyway. So we're gradually increasing that over time to get there to that point we have it, so we reach 1.2 million. And then you're fairly stable. One of the things to remember with all these things, I mean, we're talking about today's dollars. Certainly, once we get our reserve contributions stabilized to the point where they're supposed to be, we have to make sure we index them with cost of living, so keep up track with what future costs will look like. Okay. I think that's all I need for those tables. So they're all kind of that same similar. So we're using those tables comprehensively to do our analysis to bring information back into the broader picture in terms of that financial strategy. So I can put back the presentation. Thank you. So staff have gone through all that effort in terms of creating those documents, figuring out how we funded, where the different dollars might come from. And then be able to figure out how we keep the cash flow so that we don't go into a negative on each of those capital expenditures over the course of the next few years. We presented 3 options to council in terms of how to fund this. One being debt option, one being a no debt option, and one being a deferral option. And the deferral option really kind of fundamentally comes into play simply because if we order a tandem today, we won't get it to 2025 then. Deferring a few of the other capital projects as well makes that a bit more of a viable, reasonable option. It's what staff are recommending. The bottom line, there really is no easy solution to fund your existing capital projects. Never is. It's always a challenge. Every municipality has this struggle. Every level of municipality has this struggle. Okay, next slide, please. What I need from council today, would like to be able to get some direction from you. We need direction in terms of which option council prefers to follow. Because we need to know which direction you're leading towards so that we can prepare our operational budgets accordingly to represent what that looks like. I'm not saying it's 100% that you have to go the direction you might give us today. If once you get into operational budgets, for some reason you want to go back and look at something different, it will cause a delay, but certainly staff and I can't move forward until we get some direction from you today. The last thing I need to do is make sure, because of such a long turnaround time for us to be able to order equipment, particularly a tandem, which is for those that maybe don't know what a tandem is. That's our snowplow trucks for all intents and purposes. Those are very custom ordered type pieces of equipment, hence why there's such a long delivery period of time. If we're going to be truly looking at 18 months for the delivery of these types of pieces of equipment in the future, we're going to have to be thinking 2 years ahead in terms of getting authorization from council to incur expense 2 years later, which is a bit of a unique twist in terms of how budgets have been done historically. With that, that's my presentation, and I'm happy to have any conversations, answer any questions.
Just before I go to council, I walk you through what I do. The fact that they give us these breakdowns to show us what they're working on, that's great. I'll tell you right now, I don't go through these. Not to much extent, for the simple fact that if I need to see what they're getting at the end, that's fine. I'm not the auditor for the municipality. I want to look at what we're doing this year. This tells me how they've got it planned out over the years. If you're not great at doing the spreadsheets, it's not the end of the world. If you've read this and you've got any questions, this is the meat and potatoes for the most part. It really is. This is just a better breakdown to show you how they got there. If you don't like doing the spreadsheets, it's not the end of the world by any means, but knowing this information is very beneficial in getting to where we need to be. Councilor Chartrand, you got a question?
I have several questions. First, was there 1 or 2 things that you parked that you wanted to bring back up?
The bridge swim.
Yeah, we come back to it.
Okay, yeah. So right now, the provincial government is really pushing grants for more for the housing side. The fact that we're almost at capacity for growth at our waste treatment plant. And the fact that we want to do more housing in our area, is there opportunities for grants to upgrade our system? Where if there is, we could possibly borrow money from our own self. From the sewer reserves.
Well, it's a good question, and certainly I think we're always scanning for those opportunities if we're to do that. I think there's a plan in place, and I think if I correctly, and I think we had this conversation on the water sewer committee. The intent is for Mr. Mills to get us to what I would call a design ready state for our sewer expansion system here in Seaforth. So that the grant opportunity, like Councilor Chartrand is speaking about, comes available, we can apply. Yeah. We're successful. We're certainly gonna need almost every penny, but we'll need every penny of that sewer reserve, right? We potentially, I suppose, doesn't look like there's much more to borrow from in terms of other reserves. But presumably you're hoping you're getting a pretty sizable grant from the.
Every time you turn TV on, it's all you hear from the provincial government.
So if we say it's $9 million and the province and the feds are coming forward with some type of funding program, let's assume it's a one-third type share arrangement. And 9 million is kind of your dollar figure. You're looking at basically the municipality is gonna come up with 3. We could probably figure out a way to cash flow 3. Right? In terms of that process. So,
Okay.
gotta keep that in mind is maybe we're not looking at doing a sewer expansion, of course, over the next years per se. If the grant opportunity comes up and we want to move it, advance it sooner rather than later. We want to make sure we have some funding available of our own dollars to be able to put towards whatever that expansion.
The other thing that would have been nice to see too is in the chart, you showed how much, like, I think Seaport Sewer and Water was $5 million.
Yeah.
And then over the next 10 years, how much you're gonna spend. But nice to see how much we're gonna collect in reserves over those 10 years.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, because we are gonna be still collecting big time money over those next 10 years.
I wouldn't go so far as big time money.
Wow.
But I think fair enough. You can certainly show that. I just didn't want to really get too much into that because those reserve contributions, I mean,
The way
we're
you
gonna have
laid
to
it,
change.
the way you laid it out is, you can't touch that reserve right now because we're gonna need them over the 10 years, but we know we're gonna be collecting more reserves over those 10 years.
Yeah, but you remember the fact that a lot of those expenditures over the next 10 years were more than what we got in the reserves too. So we're gonna need money and potentially might have to borrow from one sewer reserve to fund another one, at least for a short period of time as well.
And then the two, the Walton lights and the Optimus Park lights.
Yeah.
I don't see no reason why we couldn't use the green energy fund for those lights if we're changing them to new LEDs.
Not a bad idea, never thought of it.
I mean, that's a perfect opportunity for that. And you could take that out of the levy and take it from there.
Yeah, another opportunity if the council wants to use that fund to support putting the LEDs in, because that's more energy efficient, right?
Yeah,
So that's.
because that's what they wanted to put in at the Optimus Park.
Yeah.
And nowadays you want to put LED lights in, so
Yeah,
we could utilize the green fund for that.
sure. Right.
I personally would want to take the 60,000 completely out for that tennis court.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. I'm gonna bring that back to the Seaport Development Trust, because we're always looking for opportunities to give back to the community, because that's what the Seaport Trust is all about. Now, it's just a thought at this point in time.
Okay.
But even though it may not be passed at our meeting, I don't see a need for that right now. That's a want have.
Okay.
I don't think we need that.
Okay.
I like the idea of deferring the tandem truck, obviously, because you have no choice. Your hands are tied.
Yeah, for sure.
I would like to do the same thing with the 2 pickup trucks.
They are included in that deferral.
Oh, all 3 are.
All three are, yeah.
Okay. I just picked up that was just the tandem.
No, all 3 of them will be deferred. The only thing that was in the existing public works and equipment capital plan, I believe, was the 25,000 for that roadway mower. Because I need that to do roadside maintenance in 2024.
Okay, and in the, I covered those, in the fire department's, section there. Nowhere in there at all did I see any funds put aside to repair the Seaport siren system that everybody in town wants fixed.
Yeah, I don't think that's a capital cost requirement. I think it's really more of a technological challenge we're faced with. In terms of the communication system going forward, I don't think there's significant dollars there. it's certainly not, from my standpoint, a capital requirement. It would be something we manage with our existing repairs and maintenance budget, or, you
But
know,
we haven't done it yet this year.
because we haven't figured out how to fix it yet.
And correct me if I'm wrong, didn't we in the last year's budget, didn't we have a money set aside for scuba gear in 2023 budget? 900,000?
I don't know if it's quite 900, yeah, that's probably about 900,000, some of it being funded, so.
So why doesn't that just carry over to 2024? So that's not it.
Well, I'm keeping it, even though we'll carry the dollars over, right, in terms of funding it, it's still a 2023 capital purchase requirement, I'm not sure.
But you've added that price into 2024 budget.
No, I haven't.
It won't get added, so wait.
No.
This was just.
That was the compressor fill for the SCBA, not SCBA equipment itself.
26,000 versus 900.
Okay,
26 down, that's.
Well, that's what the cost to build the filling station,
Yeah,
or whatever it was.
that's
versus the
separate from the
equipment.
okay,
tank.
so for the $900,000 we did last year, it's just gonna roll over to this year.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't come into this financial plan per se, because we've already set dollars and a plan how to do that. The one thing that I think what I would recommend to council, we had originally anticipated that we borrow a little bit of money for that SCBA equipment. I'm thinking that with the dollars that we got from the sale of the Venastra property and some of the other additional cashes that have been flowing in recently, that we use those dollars to offset so we don't have to borrow the SCBA equipment.
And then my last question is, Kent's put together a budget for 2024, not knowing yet what the final fire review service, results are. Because you're in the process right now of doing a full fire review.
Yeah.
And
Want to speak to that maybe Kent, a little bit?
Yeah, there's definitely some unknowns of what's gonna come out of the review, that's the idea. I'm assuming that there'll be some things that will cost, but we're looking at March, April. We're gonna be almost halfway into the year by the time the fire service review is complete and we start getting that. So I think, we have planned for some things that we expect to come out of that, but I think there is gonna be other things that will probably impact budget 2025.
so anything that would come out of that review would be in next year's budget.
If there's any actual
any.
capital requirements, and if there may be potentially where there's some reduction in what we need in terms of equipment, right?
Yeah,
So that always have potential, the flip side of it too, is it might actually say, we've got excess surplus equipment that we can dispose of. And that might help adjust our financial strategy going forward.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions of council? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, can I go to Barry with a question or?
You absolutely can.
um, First, thank you, Barry, for considering me. So I want to talk about the roadside mowing. So you're going to hire, plans are to hire one person to hire one more, to buy a new mower, correct?
Correct.
How long, and I know it's been a while since we've been involved in, how long do you anticipate it taking to make the first cut in Huron East?
About 6 weeks.
6 weeks. So you're gonna be starting in middle of May to be done by the end of June.
Late
I'm-
May, late May.
Yeah, so and I know that June is just sort of a hypothetical, but that's typically what you like to aim for, so, correct?
Yes, before things get the seed and everything else.
Yeah, I'm just worried about the first, or the near the end of May, depending on what type of spring it is. They wouldn't be cutting much in May. Maybe cutting a whole lot at that by the end of June, so that's all I wondered if either A, we're gonna need 2 people to do it.
We're only anticipating one, and we want to make sure that his time's filled through the whole year. And simply, the wintertime months, you kind of know the problem we have in getting employees for wintertime months. But the off seasons, that aren't, like you would say, snow plowing or cutting grass, we have trees that you can cut for the next 50 years.
And I know it's unfair to sort of ask questions about this. We almost need to get a year under our belt to see how that's going to work, so.
The whole process came from the last tender program. Tender process, when we looked at the next lowest tender was double the one we had, so we opted to go with the lowest tender, obviously. And then talking to neighboring municipalities, that amount is even more than our second tender now. So financially, we can offset the numbers to take it in-house, rent a tractor, a capital piece, rather than own it for the entire year, just rent it for the season, which is about, I guess, about 6 months. And then give it back and have no obligations for maintenance and repairs for that piece of equipment. And then we don't have it in stock, similar to the grader that we now rent for the winter months. I see that program's even caught on in our neighboring municipalities as well, simply because of the insurance cost and owning or getting a contractor to do it.
Right. If I can follow up with something else, and it's about the tandem truck, I'm certainly in favor of putting that off, but that's where we go. I was more interested to know the sort of the history on, because at one time we were pursuing a used truck. So that didn't happen or wasn't able to. Because either a availability or cost wise, how did that happen, or how did that end, I should say?
Actually, it was quite an exciting time for myself to do a public auction with your money.
Stretching the better word, I think.
Well, I made everybody aware of what was going on, that's for sure. But we did pursue 2 auctions with the truck this year. One was with Ritchie Brothers. There was, I believe, 10 tandem trucks, 2016s. We had our budget. We took the bid up to just over 100, or just right around the $100,000 mark. I actually sent Joe down to look at them and pick through which one he thought would be the best one. So we ran it up to be second bid in the tender on the first lot of 5 trucks. And if you know the process, the highest tender has an option of taking them all, or taking one, or taking 2. We took them all. So, okay, so the second one we ran up, the second lot come up, we ran it up a little higher, and it is kind of nerve wracking. It's not my money I'm spending, and if something goes wrong, I'm gonna be the one on the hook for it. So anyway, we did do it. We ran it back up, and we ran it back up to be second again. Well, we were thinking, okay, take one truck, second lot. Well, no, they took all of them. So that was the end of that one. And then the second one was an older truck. I wasn't really in favor of it, so maybe I wasn't as aggressive on it, but I sent Joe to look at it nonetheless to qualify it. And we put a dollar value on it before we started bidding on this one to change it up. I'm not an expert at this, but I give it a go anyway. We bid it up to 55,000. And that was our mark, and it went to 60,000, and we were second again. So that's our history of buying the bidding process. We weren't successful, and if we were, we would have a used truck from, I don't know where, how it was used. All we could do is just inspect it. So that's how that program ran out last year.
And just to follow up then, when, do we do any sort of, for lack of a better word, say you're after 2 pickup trucks and a tandem truck, do we talk to any other municipalities, see if they're buying to buy in bulk to get better prices, or is there much left? I know we've talked about it different times. I didn't know if we ever followed up with doing that practice or even picking up the phone to call.
We've done the practice of joint purchasing in the past for graders, and we did that somewhat successfully and not so successful because, everybody wants their piece of equipment in the municipality. But it did go well, and the tender process then was Howick. I think it was South Bruce and us. We all bought graders. We bought 3 cats that year. So that actually worked out pretty good, but it's a lot of time consuming to put it all together with 3 different parties. The second part of it, the municipal grant programs, they've gone by the wayside pretty much on the pickup trucks. You probably saw that from our last purchase, and actually just getting a pickup truck, we still haven't got the one that we ordered 6 months ago.
Right.
And I think we're gonna have to rethink that program even. You might not have a color-coded fleet in the future, but if you look at something that's on the lot, you're gonna get, I believe, just as cheap, and you have it. So I don't know, revisit that program. I haven't really given a lot of thought process through that. And to finalize your question, no, I don't think it's beneficial for a municipality to go down that road anymore. There is the program now that's out called LAS and the canoe procurement thing that is advertised at the Roma and Good Roads and those places. That's what we're gonna look at this year for say your procurement, and you don't have to go through the tender process and all that other stuff. They do it all for you. And, give you the bill, it's invoiced direct to you at the end. So if you go to the conferences, look into it, that's what we'll be, looking into as well.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Barry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Question through you to Brad. Brad, so you said in the streetlight reserve, I think it said $98,000 in there. But what's funding that reserve now, or is it eventually gonna be gone away? Because from what I understand, we rolled that into general taxation.
We did, but we still collect a certain amount of money on that in terms of that. It's cost center. We collect a little bit of dollars there to put into that reserve.
Oh, okay.
Basis.
And if I can have one more question, please, and it's just through you to Cantif. Is Cantif? Yeah, Cantif. And I was just wondering, in the budget, they were talking about airbags at the stations. How many airbags are in each station?
That's a good question. I'm not sure exactly. Usually the lifting bag sets are normally 3 bags in a set. Different sizes, different capacities of how much they can lift. So that's the most common what I've seen. I couldn't tell you for sure if that's what's in these 3 stations.
Okay, so the $30,000, I think that's what's in there. So that's set per station.
Yes, it would.
Thank you.
Just before I go to Councillor Stepler, so, and Deputy Mayor kind of, brought it up, but that's why you see the anomaly that Brad was pointing out on this sheet with the highlighted yellow. When if you take into effect that, or into account the fact that, we had a super deal with whoever was cutting our grass in the past. And unfortunately, we're gonna lose that. So it's going to cost us more, which is going to bring us up on the taxation side of this. John Hill was another great decision this council made. We have saved a fortune over the years by having our own in-house handyman to do work all over the municipality. And for what we have to pay John compared to going out and finding contractors to do all the things that he did. And as long as we've got John here, it's working great. But if we lost John and couldn't find someone to replace John, it would cost us a lot more to take care of everything that John does for us. He is a very valuable employee and benefited the municipality a lot over the years.
Very talented individual as well.
Yes. Councilor Stepler, you had.
Yeah, CEO Brad. You know, a lot of work goes into this and everything. I just. You know, we're building these reserves up over time and we have to because we're basically starting at 0 again, and that's fine. But I would like to see probably a 20-25% reduction in reserves right now. That gives us time to maybe recapture, get those back up to an end goal in 5 or 6 years, but because right now we don't have the money. Or we're gonna ask our taxpayers to pay a lot more money to build up a reserve today. That we don't have. I mean, you know, every family sitting there, I'd love to put the first 30% money and 30% of their bank account into a reserve fund for tomorrow. But if we could cut that by 20-25% of every reserve contribution for this year, not changing next year or the year after, maybe adjusting a bit higher in the following years, would that be something that could help us this year on the levy piece? That we're charting to chase, I get it, but
I think I understand your question. The reality is I've already went through a fairly significant exercise to make sure that each reserve contribution for each year as we ramp up is as low as possible to be able to support the capital requirements. Okay, so if I'm reducing it, what are you cutting out of the capital program? That's the bottom line. If I take 25% of any particular reserve, tell me where I'm cutting the capital program.
but I
And
think,
what capital are you not gonna do? Or better phrase, what service are you gonna start to cut?
but could we get our, work that on our 5-year plan? So our end goal is $10 and we're going $2 each year. Could we just raise the numbers? Could we go 8
But
and
I'm
then
all-
next year 9?
I understand the question. My reality is though, if I'm gonna spend money in 24 and 25, I don't have anything to cut. Right? So if you're gonna do everything that we need to do in 24 and 25, I need all the money that I'm saying I'm asking for already.
So maybe it's me not understanding. I apologize. in
No,
advance.
that's okay.
But let's just say on the, go to, I don't know which one. Let's see, table,
If I can give you two examples, Counselor Stephanie, hopefully it might help.
thank you.
When we did our pay equity thing, we found out that we had to go up, it was around 11% raise for all the employees.
Correct.
If we had done 1/4% every year for the last 10 years,
Mhm.
which only would have technically, that only sounds like 2.5%, we wouldn't have had to do the 11%.
That's correct.
When you pay up front, and the example when Brad went through there, instead of doing 11.6 or 11.9, we did the 13%. Heck, for the next 4 years, you don't have to add anything to your capital budget. Paying the little extra up front alleviates all the problem down the road. It's the reverse also. If you cut back a little bit on the first year, it makes it a lot worse down the road. And
Well,
if we did exactly what you said, the unfortunate problem is we're gonna be having the exact same argument every year after because it's, oh, it seems like too much this year. Can we kick it down the road?
I hear you. We're starting at zero. We're not paying, like I'm going to table 4 in the water plan. Every year, we're looking at 509,000. If we cut that by 20% this year. And then, so that puts it to, let's just say 400,000 and add it by 5% for the next 3 years. By the time we get to 2028, our reserves are gonna be the same. Minus or take, we gotta increase it now, but we're speculating right now what our costs are gonna be to a 5-year period. We don't wanna have our end dollar any less. Yes, we're doing it, but the economy may be different, the grants may be different, the needs and wants may be different. Right now, quite frankly, we don't have the money in our tax bases and our systems and levies, et cetera, to get a sustainable tax increase all across the board. So I'm not saying don't replace them. I'm saying take a bit now, spread them over a 5-year period, come to the same end dollar. That's just the suggestion.
So you're using the water one, for example, and those are a separate cost.
Well, yeah,
They
any
don't mix.
different, like anyone, the same.
But I don't have any dollars in reserves right now for most of my assets to be able to say, okay, let's take a little bit off that and we'll get there later. I need to put the amount that's in reserve contributions for 2024 is the bare minimum you need to be able to get the capital replacement dollars that you're proposing. We can go through those capital dollars, through the operational plans and kind of say, maybe I don't need this. Councillor Chartrand said, we can take 60 out for the tennis courts. Maybe that could be something that the trust does. There he dropped it by $60,000, right? So there are things we can do that way in terms of looking at the capital plan. But I think I've basically made your reserve contributions as bare bones. You're not leaving any money in sitting in the reserve. But
No, I get it. I just don't know if we're in a position right now to pay it all up front when we could do the same end goal in 5 years, but I trust all the work everybody's done. It's just my opinion on wanting to stay static.
And I think the positive piece to say is that if our asset management plan says we need to have a 4.2% capital levy, and we're coming in less than that and able to fund our infrastructure and our capital assets and gradually increase it with less than a 4.2% levy requirement, I think we're doing well.
Councillor Chartrand?
Yeah,
Oh,
just-
sorry. I'm gonna go to Councillor Newell because the intent is to try and get around the
Yeah.
room once first. Go ahead,
Great,
Councillor.
thanks. This is directed to council. I think it's very important that we're investing in the infrastructure, specifically with the Seaport Community Center roof. So that's a very important thing. I'm concerned that our capital funding options that we've got, a common theme through all of them is that the reserves, or the discretionary reserves will be depleted to offset the capital expenditures. And that seems to be a theme throughout all of the 3 options. One of the options that wasn't explored is the notion of fundraising, and it was brought up and there was some notes, comments made about it. But we have to realize that the Huron East community, the committee specifically with BMG and the residents and businesses, they all invested in our community. And the roof was part of that project. And I'm concerned that we've got 2 roof projects within the same year and both are being handled differently. And I know that they're not comparing completely apples to apples. I understand that. But I think when you look at some of the survey results, 29% of people would spend $100 on recreation facilities. I know that's only 80 people or 54 people that replied, but if they're representative of the community, there is an interest there. So I think we're counting people short on the ability to fundraise. And we've seen it done recently, and I think it can be done. There is pros and cons to each of the options that are presented to us. But I think that if you look at this as a recreational asset, and we've already made an agreement, and a capital expenditure, we fundraise for, why don't we fundraise for half of the roof like we do for playgrounds? We require community groups or the community to come forward, say it's a recreational asset. We've talked about the lights as an example in Walton. Maybe there's a portion of it that gets fundraised, or we set it off over time or extended it a little bit. But I don't think we should discount the notion that people can fundraise. I'm prepared to make a motion that we have an option D, which is not a fundraising campaign.
If I can respond to a couple things to that. I had raised it here at the table. I have had conversations with the CAO about it, and he did actually contact the group that helped do the fundraising in Brussels. And my understanding is they said it's a non-starter, and it's a non-starter because it's not something that the public sees as a benefit to them, where the fundraising that happened the last time we did some upgrades at the Seaforth Arena, the public actually raised well more than what was asked of them, because it was new change rooms, things like that. They got to see the benefit for themselves of having those changes done. And in Brussels, again, the majority of all the things that are being done are things that are improvements to the facilities to the benefit of the public themselves. The roof is a true maintenance item, and the roof is a true maintenance item here. So that firm that helped in Brussels said they didn't feel it was even worth their while. They'd be willing to investigate, but to investigate, they wanted I forget whether it was $25,000 or $30,000 or whatever upfront just to even look into the concept, but felt it was probably money wasted. That's not something you would get support from the community when it wasn't something they saw as a improvement to their usage. Just to let you know that it was looked into.
So
I'm gonna go to Councillor Wilby.
Yeah, just, it's not a question, it's just to let all the counselors know that I had a huge concern about this Walton ballpark replacement. I did speak to Brad about it when he was at my house. He is looking in, as he said, to seeing, what state they're in. The 50% to me on $75,000 was shocking, and living in just outside of Walton, it's our last community place, and I just felt to lose it would the park not be able to use it because the lights aren't there would be a shame. I did call our lady that looks after the money. We do get money from TCC to support our park, but it's not near enough. And thank you to Ray for mentioning the Green Energy Fund. That was really great. But yeah, this is a real huge thing for me. So whether or not we could get any fundraising, following up on your statements, I'm not sure. We might get a little bit, but not anywhere near that figure. So just wanted to make my thoughts on this particular item known to everyone, so.
Councillor Chartrand, we're back to you.
I'm a little confused because my understanding was all the fundraising money that they did in Brussels, that was not used on the roof.
And
The roof was separate because our $1.6 million loan that we just did, 1.8, whatever it was, that was money towards the roof. And that was separate from the fundraising.
you're not incorrect with your statement. I think part of the problem was, even though we may have understood that there was different things and different costs and how it was going together, when the information went out to the public of what all was going to be done, fixing the roof was listed in it. So whether they thought their money was going to fix the roof or just the other upgrades that they were going to receive a benefit from in the facility, we didn't do a good enough job of communicating of where everybody's money was going. And that's maybe our mistake, but yes, it's very easy on paper to make the argument that the municipality is paying for the roof, the
Right.
community is paying for the improvements to the facility. So, yeah,
Cause we raised our portion compared to our original portion that the municipality was gonna give. Because of the roof, and then every time a wall got opened up, there was some other thing found and the price kept on getting higher and higher and higher. Thus, our portion ended up being a lot higher too. Am I correct, Brad?
Our portions remain consistent. The main benefactor is the fact that we actually had not surplus. We had additional funds from the fundraising campaign to keep us on budget.
But the roof was separate.
yeah, so.
I just want to clarify, I don't think we ever distinctively said the roof was being paid by the municipality. It was just, here's what the cost is, which included the roof and all the expansion. Here's everybody's contribution. There was never some, I don't know where that notion came out that our portion was for the roof. I know there were conversations that the municipality should pay for the roof. There were certainly conversations and comments made to that effect. But that was not how the funding was put together. Everybody had their contributions, it was for the collective whole. And it included fundraising, included provincial and federal dollars, and it included municipal dollars both from Huron East as well as Morris Turnberry. No one was paying distinctly for any particular part of that building.
Okay, I think,
I had the impression from day one, Mr. McRoberts, that it was us who was paying for the roof from 3 or 4 years ago, sir.
And that might have been before my time, but certainly not since when I wrote the project forward. But I did not look at it from that perspective. It was a project that was being requested by the community and everybody was a partner in that funding contribution.
okay,
Yeah, and we were, we were the roof partner. But, okay, anyway,
okay, Councillor Fisher, you were next on the list.
thank you, Mr. Mayor. Optimist call. I'm not anti-optimist by any means. I don't wanna be attacked going down the road, but I think we should tear that hall down, not put money into it. There's no accessible washroom. We wanna put in a lift to go up to a second-story hall that does not have an accessible washroom on that floor. Needs a roof. It's a monster to heat. I think we should tear it down, put in a one-story hall with accessible washrooms and go to Trillium and go to age-friendly community. The Ministry of Seniors and Accessibility did have bagfuls of money for doing accessible age-friendly things in communities. I don't know if they still do. And build it as a Seaforth Optimist / senior center. Not put any more money into an old building. I realize that if the roof is shot, then we have to do the roof, but I think we should be proactive, tear it down. Clean up that area with a new building and you might have room for a couple pickleball courts, or you might have room for, put in a couple basketball nets, whatever. Just improve that corner. I don't see any point in putting any money into that building.
There's a couple of
Yeah, go
comments I'd
ahead.
like to follow up on that. So, I wasn't aware of the fact, but I guess we actually have, we have an Optimist agreement. So the building itself is wholly the Optimist responsibility. They in fact actually went ahead and got the roof completed. They covered those costs. Our responsibility is 50% for all the park related capital assets. So I know I put it up to 2025 for an accessibility requirement in terms of funding for that. Since it is our asset, you're right, we need to make a hard decision about that. If that's what council wants to do is abandon that facility per se and maybe move into some other type of a building system. Either way, before, I forget what the deadline is, we have to make sure that all of our buildings are accessible or have accessibility measures in place. And so hence why I put some dollars in 2025. Council wants to take a completely different direction with that property, that building, you can go ahead and do that. It's not a 2024 critical issue, but certainly by 2025, we need to have a decision.
Councillor Stefan.
And just a little bit further on Councillor Newell there. I honestly believe that, you know, recreation gets picked on. Recreation gets picked on basically for, you know, fundraise for new this, fundraise for that. We need, as a municipality, recreation, healthcare, education. They're responsibilities of the municipality, part of the tax base, part of the services. So I go the other way. We need to provide the basic services, so the lights, so that they're workable. Fundraise only for extras. If they want to go above and beyond what it is, that's great. But we have a responsibility for all our roads, our recreation. It's part of living here in East and around, that we don't fundraise for anything unless they want to go and put on extra of what we can really sustain. So, you know, I don't see, we had, and again, we've all talked about it, but I have no kids in the education system. I still pay education tax. We go through all those different things. Here's our basic service. This is what we provide for the municipality. Here's your beautiful ice rink. Here's your beautiful community center. If you want to have 4 extra on top of that and you want to fundraise for it, perfect. But I don't like these 50% fundraising. You go half, we'll go half. Because ultimately we're screwed, or sorry, we're set back. If they don't raise it, we're still building. We're committed. So let's build the basic. Let's keep the projects going. But let's take out all these fundraising, this or that, unless it's an extra on what we're willing to provide and maintain.
Councillor Newell was next.
Yeah, I just had a question with regards to the roof, either repair or full replacement. How do we know that it needs a full replacement? Has there been like a roofing consultant that's done it or
Which roofs are you talking about?
So
Sorry.
you're talking about the roof on the Seaforth Arena.
Because it's leaking. We have lots of leaks in the building. We have had an assessment done. They've identified basically all the deficiencies with the existing roof, both the, what I'll call the slope portions of the roof as well as the flat surfaces. So that whole process is where we went through to determine what the scope was required.
Okay,
we
so
had a
it's
consultant.
replacement versus repair.
Yeah, we had a consultant come in and actually look at options in terms of what we could do in terms of roof replacement. You know, whether you kind of put something over top of what's there, whether you can carry that load. Ultimately, the engineering assessment came back and said there's no load bearing capacity. So it's literally kind of into a replacement mode.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chartrand.
And just one last point, the $1.8 million debenture that we took.
Yep.
For the Brussels Arena. That expense is paid for in our taxes for the whole municipality, not just Brussels.
Correct.
So Huron East as a whole, C4, Harper Hay, Tucker Smith, we're all paying for the Brussels
Renovation.
renovations.
Yes. And it's actually carried in my capital plan. Right, so it's not lost somewhere. I carry it to the capital plan.
Deputy Mayor was next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to comment and to build on the 50% that Councillor Stefan was talking about. In the past, and I'm going to speak for the Ethel Community Center. We've always, and I've always seen it as if we invest ourselves 50% into that community center, there's a reason to keep it open. It keeps the community involved, so if there is windows to be replaced or something, I think it's important though as well to keep the community engaged. Using it, and that's where I have found that 50% rule. Now, you know, if we needed a new roof or something at the community center in Ethel, maybe we couldn't do it all, but I think it's important to engage the community and say, hey, look at me, you know, let's see what we can do. Whether it's turkey suppers, whatever, you know, that way you have the community involved in it as well, and to keep the doors open, because I just feel otherwise if your niece comes along and says, oh, don't worry about that, we'll pay the bill for that.
Yeah,
You know,
just
so I think there's a good part. I certainly understand what you're saying as well. I'm just relating back to what I see is a good thing on it, so.
We definitely have an obligation to the community of Ethel.
I always want to try and stop the debate back
Yeah,
and forth.
we're good.
They're just comments from individuals. Councillor McGrath, you next.
I have a couple of questions. I think it still comes down to no debentures. I hate debentures. I think we're gonna have to go into what's a priority. I've heard air conditioning on the building here and office renovations and stuff. We're hit with a $1.6 or $8 million roof at the arena. That's a necessity. That's gotta be done. I think we're gonna have to go to the roots where we say, putting the Sterling truck off for a year, maybe 2 years. I realize there's risks involved with blowing up, breaking, whatever the fact may be. But I think at the end of the day, we're gonna have to come down to the reality that we don't even know what we're short last year on the budget, because we've gone through likely with pay equity and the increases, we'd like to be an increased payroll anywhere between 300,000 to 400,000, maybe more for this coming year. What were we short last year is another question that we didn't get done or what we fell short on. So we could be in a big hole even before and I realize this is just to give the staff an exercise of where to go. But that's more important to us to know how much are we short right now before that, like 21%, 10%, like that's a lot of change. That's my opinion, not necessarily those of the professionals, because I'm not that professional for sure, and I'm not an accountant. Another question I have though is, I know Barry has mentioned the mower and leasing a tractor, but it wasn't that long ago when we did a little comparison with, it was a sidewalk issue, you might remember, where is it cheaper for us to do it or have a contractor come in and do it? And it was cheaper for the contractor because when we got the price from in-house, they didn't include a few things. They said, for example, well, we have the employee anyway. So, well, that doesn't matter. You have the employee. The employee still costs you money, right? So I think I'd like to see a better cost comparison on the mower. And, maybe to lease a tractor, what's that gonna cost? So put the true dollar value on in-house versus how much do they want to hire it at. I realize there's a time frame as well, as Elvin's alluded to, but possibly something can be done there. I firmly believe that this exercise has started 30 years too late. This should have been done, money put away, X amount, a little more taxes back in the day to be where we should be today. We're too far behind to continue on, and unless we nail the taxpayer good and hard, I don't see a easy, simple way of, as I alluded to before, within the next 3 years, my taxes are going up $1,000, 300, 300, 300, with what we approved before we talked about pay equity and short stay. So this is some information I don't believe we know. I know they need this as an exercise, but I'm not about to say go order a tandem truck at this point. That's my personal opinion.
One thing maybe it's just semantics, I don't know, but we've been doing debt financing for almost 20 years.
That's what I mean.
But it has always worked out fine. The fact is that, I'm gonna say it has always worked out fine. The investments that we made have done exactly what they were supposed to do. Whether we're paying the interest to a separate body or whether we're paying it to the province or whatever, we're paying that interest. We just felt more comfortable because we borrowed it in-house, but at the end of the day, we were paying back this same amount of money. It didn't change anything. I understand your comment about, you do have to take those extra employees and things into account. I agree with that 100%. The fact that they've already done a little bit of analysis and found out that it's double the price to get it cut. And I don't have any problem asking them to go back and look at some numbers, but we always have had a shortage of staff in the winter, and the fact that we would end up hopefully with an extra employee in the winter would help alleviate a problem in a different area. So there was an advantage to the municipality in doing something like that. So we'd have them for summer and winter, and as Barry pointed out, there are so many things that we can have that person doing that we're so far behind on, there's an advantage. But we can still do the analysis that you're asking about. Although I think they've done most of that analysis. I'll go to Brad first and then to Councilor Sherrill.
Certainly, in terms of Councilor McGrath's comment, we're more than happy to provide that analysis. Clearly, I think we wouldn't be recommending it if we didn't believe it was more cost effective.
I'd like
But we'll bring it
Yeah.
forward for council's.
That'd be appreciated, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Councilor Sherrill?
Yes, and it gets back to what Councilman McGrath said, and I know in the past, this is directed to Stacy. We have asked, well, how do we do for 2022? Did we make money or not? And we never ever did here at the year's end of 2022, and now we're into 2023. That's probably too early yet to say how did we do in 2023, but how did we actually do for 2022?
I can give an answer on that. We're pretty well breaking even. There's really no surplus, there's really no deficit.
For 2022?
We'll have a more fulsome kind of, we'll bring in our financial information report to the.
Is it be interesting to see, and how do we do in 2023, you know?
Basically, we balanced the budget is the bottom line. There's some other,
No surplus.
no surplus, not necessarily deficit.
We're really close.
So we haven't reduced those long-term deficit financing that we did.
So we're not gonna have to worry, to Larry's point, that 2023, we're gonna be in a hole to start.
No, we're not in the hole, but we don't have the extra cash either.
Not more than what we budgeted for, because we did budget for the lost carry forwards in the cemetery, the arena and the fire. 2023 so far, I looked at it as well at the same time, it's looking pretty well on overall on target. We still are delayed with projects and things like that, but overall,
Well, that's a good thing, so we're not gonna start in the hole,
so
so,
well.
thank you.
So the whole intent and the information that staff put together, and I understand Councilor McGrath is not in favor, but staff would really like a direction from council. Because none of these are cast in stone at the moment, but they need to have some sort of direction going forward. So that they can prepare the rest of the information to bring a budget forward for us to then go through line by line. But there was a couple critical things, and I understand Councilor Graff may not be in favor of it. But by using the deferral, which was requested, that is also then asking council to commit to the truck to be delivered in 2025. Year and a half down the road. Now, it was already technically supposed to be ordered. It was planned a long time ago. And we're pushing it out. Not that we want to push it out, but we just can't get it. That's all there is to it. And I guess it's all three vehicles that are being deferred a little bit. So, go ahead.
I'm in favor with the option of deferring. That way there, we're not borrowing any money.
Now, the deferring option actually increased the levy by 0.3%, did it not?
It increased each of the levies for the next 5 years. Modestly, some a little bit more in the later years, but.
But dropped it down this year if we went for the whole ball of wax was 21%.
For sure, a lot less than no debt and full taxation, but.
Okay.
Certainly more than the strategy.
So, just so that council understands, if we give the direction to staff today, you are not passing your final 2024 budget. That's not what we're doing. We're telling staff that we will authorize the ordering of the truck, which we're expecting to have delivered in 2025. You can still go through line by line, and we can look at each item when the budget comes forward, and if there's something that we can do after the fact, so be it. But if we give authorization at this point that we understand a year and a half from now, we will be getting a new tandem truck and a couple of pickup trucks, that let's not back out on that when the truck shows up kind of deal, is all I'm stating. But you will still have the opportunity to go through the budget before the final budget is passed. I'll go to Councilor Deal next, she hasn't had a chance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So you say that if we go with the recommendation for the deferral, we are agreeing to all three trucks? Or just the ordering of the tandem right now?
Just the ordering of the tandem at this point.
Is that correct?
Just because I've got an 18-month lead time on that, so I need to get it ordered.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilor McGrath?
just so you stand corrected, your worship.
Okay.
I totally anticipated losing my vote on extending the truck out to 2026. Okay? But I would definitely vote in favor of having them be able to start the negotiations here, because I'm fully aware that we are still gonna go through it line by line, and then we will have more numbers at our benefit then, like we'll have, you know, yes, we broke even last year, but we have holes here this year, so, yeah. So that's all right, I admit defeat right off the rank here. Not a problem, not a problem.
Yes.
I believe Councilor Rule had made a motion with this statement as well, so we should probably deal with that motion.
Oh,
before we go with
sorry.
the remaining stuff.
Sorry. What was your motion, sir?
The motion was to consider an option D, which included fundraising.
Okay, can I only ask one question then? What is, or how would that fundraising look, going forward? Because my understanding is staff have already indicated they're not in a position, and we already know that they're struggling to get the workload done we've got with the number of staff that we've got. And we've already contacted the agency that did help with Brussels, and they're not willing to do it unless we're willing to pay a whole bunch of money up front to look at, but they're already recommending we don't, because they say this is not something that's a winner for them to begin with. Do we have a suggestion of how that fundraising could happen?
No, and I won't charge you $20,000 to take a look at it. But no, I'm not a fundraising expert. So I don't have the plan of how that would unfold. But I think it should be something that is considered, because we have had success with fundraising for things that are deferred maintenance. I know it was part of the package when the P&G volunteers had gone out. They did mention that the roofing was part of it. So I think there is an opportunity. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think it's something we shouldn't discount right from the start.
Okay, can I make this as a suggestion? Okay. The deputy mayor kind of piqued my interest when he talked about how Apple had even just something simple as having dinners. And we may not be able to get some of the local service groups to do it, but if they were willing to use our facility, put on a dinner and split the proceeds between their group and the municipality to maybe go towards something. But I'm gonna ask, could we, would you be willing to make the motion that we go ahead with the option that was recommended with the deferral, with the understanding that over the course of the next 60 days, we will try contacting the local groups and see if they're interested in doing something like that, with the understanding that it's really gonna come down to whether they're willing to take it on, because we don't have the capacity at this point. Is that acceptable?
Yeah, so the notion is that fundraising could be part of the option, but the deferral is the main part of
Correct.
the option.
Yes, that we will still look at fundraising if there's a viable solution.
Yeah.
Counselor.
Is this fundraising just going to be pertinent to the?
But that, it was just because it showed up in the three options that was there.
Okay.
With regards to the seaport roof, so that's why I thought.
I
was
just think it
further-
encapsulates more than that, because the hot button issue is the parks and the recreation. That's where you're gonna get your most response. From people out there, they know there's gonna be graders, they know there's going to be, but when you start touching on these parks, I have already had some feedback from that, because we have, you know, lights from Walton, or, you know, Walton and the Optimus Park, and right in the middle is Winthrop, and I think their lights are probably from the 70s. So already we get that, well, how are they gonna fundraise for lights? Can we fundraise for lights? Do we need to fundraise? The Cranbrook Hall has had a lot of grants, which is good, but there's still gonna be money needed. So I think that's where we're gonna get the pushback, is some of the small parks.
In fairness, if we take the time to get together with the groups, maybe it's not a bad conversation to say, here are all the things that we have on the go.
Have we done that?
I don't know that we've ever done that.
Well, that's what I mean.
But if we got together and said, you know what, if you have an idea or are interested in helping us do something, we don't have to say, we're gonna put a certain amount to anyone. These are the types of things that the municipality wants to go ahead to improve the community as a whole. And any assistance that we get, we're gonna state the fact that you're working with us to raise money for all these projects.
Because there are volunteers, as Councilor McClellan said, involved in these and have probably kept these parks and things going. And I think they need to have a little bit of that.
I agree, but at the end of the day, if with their assistance, whether we could raise $100,000 or $500,000 over the course of a year, we don't really care which project it went to, because at the end of the day, it's taking it off the general levy.
And I think that's what they understand.
Yeah,
You know, they're not looking to, they just want to know if there's any point to them fundraising as opposed to somebody else just getting it drafted. And that's where you got to be.
I think that would be a great meeting to have in the new year and get as many of those groups together, even in one
Or at least
room.
representative, the volunteers beyond just council.
Yeah. Yes, Dr. Gill.
Yeah, just gonna add, I'm wondering if we could maybe get this tabled through the RAC committee as well. Because it is a recreation project and it's something that they can maybe look at because you've got representation from each of our communities. There, you've got elected officials there as well. And we are talking about recreational infrastructure and it may be worthwhile to hear from those groups or that group as well.
Councilor Morrison.
For starters, I would second the motion that is on the floor. And then also for one general comment about the Walton lights. I certainly understand that there is the element that a group may help fundraise it, but I just see it from the standpoint that I certainly don't want to be around this table, nor do I think any future council does. If they're already collapsing or falling down, I think whether or not a group will add money to that pot, I think it's something we have to do whether we get funding or not. I certainly don't want to be around this table when it falls on somebody, and I don't think future council do either.
Right.
Trying to remember now, sorry, distracted me totally. In terms of what you're saying.
How about recreation groups?
Yeah, I think, in terms of following up on the mayor's suggestion about a group, I think maybe what we could do is have those groups there as well as our advisory committee in terms of that participation, let them be part of that process as well. In terms of that conversation about what's the potential in terms of fundraising collectively for whether it's individually by each group in terms of what their capital needs are going forward, or a fundraising strategy in terms of the C4 group. That would be a good exercise.
I'll tell you right now, I welcome the opportunity to sit down with those groups because in all the years I've been on council, although they have raised money for the municipality, I never recall any time we had a meeting where council itself or representative even from council sat down and said, hey, what could be our game plan going forward for the next year and how we could work together to do something. I think that's a good stepping stone going forward. Really do like the suggestion. Okay, I have a mover and a seconder for the deferral option with the understanding that we are going to see if there's the ability to do some fundraising going forward. Are there more questions before I call the vote? All those in favor of the option? And motion carries. Thank you very much, folks. Go ahead.
Then the ordering equipment.
That should be in the best.
Oh, let me see this. I took that as that was all one motion. Is that not one motion?
I'd like to have a separate motion to be clear, sorry.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, so, can I get a mover and a seconder, and this is just authorizing staff to go ahead and place the order for the tandem truck only at this point. Move by the deputy mayor, second by Councilor Deal. Any final questions? All those in favor? And motion carries. Thank you. Is there any other business by members of council this time? Seeing none, can I get a mover and a seconder for the confirmatory bylaw, moved by Councilor Deal, second by Councilor Morrison, that be it hereby resolved that bylaw 90 of 2023, a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council, begin first, second, third, and final readings, signed by the mayor and clerk, and the seal of the corporation be affixed to. All those in favor? Motion carries, and mover and a seconder for adjournment. Councilor Dalton, Councilor Wilby, the time now being 3:05 PM, the special meeting do now adjourn. All in favor?